They clearly supported Jasmine's idea. To them, we had become nothing more than a burden, a problem that needed to be solved in the easiest way possible. It was around then that the more direct suggestions started coming. Charles arrived one day carrying papers he had prepared without ever consulting us. Dad, Mom, he said with that fake smile he had mastered so well, I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth at most 1,000 years. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move somewhere better. A much better place. To us, there was no better place than the home where we had been happy for decades. But Charles didn't seem to understand that. For him, everything came down to numbers and monetary value. Besides, he continued, I think Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70 years old. It's time for him to rest. Ernest looked at him with infinite sadness. Son, working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive and gives meaning to my days. But you could get hurt, Henry insisted, always backing up his brother as usual. At your age, an accident would be very dangerous. Their words sounded caring on the surface, but I sensed something else behind them. An impatience and urgency I couldn't fully understand at the time. The following months became increasingly tense. My sons stepped up the pressure for us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents without warning us. They had the property appraised without our permission. They even started talking openly about what would be best for everyone. Look, Charles said during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, Jasmine and I have decided to have kids soon. We'll need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could serve as an early inheritance. An early inheritance? He was asking for our inheritance while we were still very much alive. The audacity of it left me completely speechless. Ernest stayed calm, but I saw his jaw tighten. Son, when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. But while we're still alive, our decisions belong to us. My name is Margot Hayes, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to share with you completely transformed my life forever. The funeral for my husband, Ernest, marked the quietest day of my entire existence. There, standing beside his grave, I received a message from an unknown number that sent a deep chill running through me. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket, it read. My hands were trembling as I replied, Who are you? The response that came back took my breath away. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. That single moment tore my soul in two. My whole world crumbled as I looked over at Charles and Henry, my own sons, standing near the casket with strangely calm expressions on their faces. Something felt terribly wrong. Their tears appeared forced, and their hugs felt as cold as ice. For 42 years, Ernest had been my partner, my safe refuge, and my reason for living. I first met him when I was 24 in our small town of Spring Creek. We had grown up along the same dusty back roads, sharing simple, modest dreams together. I cleaned houses to help support my sick mother, while Ernest repaired bicycles in the little shop he had inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were genuinely happy. We possessed something that money could never purchase: real love. I still remember the very first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking toward the market wearing my faded green dress and worn-out shoes. He stepped out of his shop with grease-stained hands and gave me a smile filled with such shyness that I fell in love with him instantly. Good morning, Margot, he said in that soft, gentle voice of his. Need me to check out your bike? I didn't even own a bike, but I quickly made up an excuse just so I could keep talking to him. That first conversation soon turned into sweet dates under the big old oak tree in Town Square Park, then into promises of eternal love, and finally into a simple wedding filled with hope and dreams for the future. The first few years of our marriage were difficult. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house with a tin roof. Whenever it rained, we would place pots all around the house to catch the leaking water, but we were still happy. Ernest worked from sunrise to sunset in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women in town. When Charles was born, I thought my heart would burst with pure happiness. He was a beautiful baby, with his father's big eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived, just as perfect in every way. I raised both of them with all the love I had in the world, always putting their needs before my own. Ernest was a wonderful father. He would take them fishing in the river every Sunday, teach them how to fix things with their hands, and tell them bedtime stories. I fed them, dressed them, and comforted them whenever they cried. We were a close family, or at least that's what I believed at the time. As the boys grew older, things slowly began to change. Charles, being the oldest, was always very ambitious. From a young age, he would ask why we lived so modestly and why we didn't have a car like other families did. Henry followed his older brother's lead in almost everything. When Charles turned 18, Ernest offered him a job at the shop, but he rejected it with a clear contempt. I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important. Those words hurt Ernest deeply, even though he never mentioned it to me. I would often see him sitting alone on the porch at night, staring up at the stars with a profound look of sadness. His son had rejected not only his work, but his entire way of life. The years went by, and to my surprise, Charles managed to build a name for himself in the business world. He landed a job at a real estate company in the city, and Henry soon followed in his footsteps. Both of them started earning far more money than Ernest and I had ever seen in our lives. At first, I felt so proud. My sons had achieved what we never could. They had escaped poverty and created better lives for themselves. But gradually, that pride turned into deep sadness. Their visits became rarer, and their phone calls grew shorter and shorter. When they did come by, they arrived in expensive cars, dressed in fancy suits, and talked endlessly about investments and properties. They would look at us with a strange mixture of pity and shame. Mom, Charles said to me during one of those infrequent visits, you and Dad should move somewhere better. This house is practically falling apart. He was right about the condition of the house, but that old place held every precious memory we had. It was where we had raised our sons, shared thousands of meals, and grown old together. It wasn't luxurious, but it was truly our home. Ernest, always the wise one, would gently tell me, Margot, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore. I tried hard to resist believing it. I kept making excuses for their absences, their short calls, and their broken promises. They're busy building their own lives, I would tell myself. Someday they'll become the loving boys we raised again. But deep in my heart, I knew Ernest was right. We had already lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just hadn't realized how completely we had become strangers to them. The most dramatic shift happened when Charles married Jasmine Albright, a woman from the city who never tried to hide her disdain for our simple way of life. The first time he brought her to our home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dirt of our porch and wore an elegant red dress that looked more expensive than anything I'd ever owned in my life. Nice to meet you, she said with a forced smile, barely offering the tips of her fingers in greeting. Her eyes scanned our humble house with an expression I couldn't quite read, but it made me feel incredibly small. During dinner, Jasmine barely touched the food I had prepared with so much care and love. She pushed the meatloaf around her plate and cut tiny pieces of chicken, but she ate almost nothing. Charles seemed nervous the whole time, constantly apologizing for things he had never felt ashamed of before. Next time, we'll take them out to a restaurant, he whispered to Jasmine, thinking I couldn't hear. But I did hear every word. Each one pierced my heart like a sharp knife. Henry, for his part, stayed single, but adopted the same distant attitude as his brother. His visits were limited to special occasions only, and even then he always seemed eager to leave quickly. He was constantly on his phone, closing deals even while we tried to have conversations. Mom, I have to go, he'd say before it was really time. I have an important meeting early tomorrow. Family Sundays became nothing more than a distant memory. Christmases turned cold and formal. My sons would bring expensive gifts we didn't need or want. They would stay for just 2 or 3 hours and then leave with obvious relief. Ernest and I grew old together, finding comfort in each other. He continued working in his shop, even though his hands had lost some of their former strength. I kept sewing, though my eyes weren't what they used to be. We managed with our modest income, proud that we never asked our successful sons for anything. Do you know what the saddest part is, Margot? Ernest said to me one night as we sat drinking coffee on the porch. It's not that they have money now. It's that the money has made them believe we aren't important anymore. He was right, as always. My sons hadn't just changed financially, they had changed in their hearts. We were no longer their beloved parents. Instead, we had become an uncomfortable reminder of a past they desperately wanted to forget. Things grew even worse when Charles bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood in the city. Henry soon did the same, purchasing a luxury condo for $150,000. Suddenly, our sons owned fortunes we could barely even imagine. You should sell this house and move into a retirement community, Jasmine suggested during one of her rare visits. There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be much more comfortable there. The word community hit me like a slap in the face. A retirement community. After 40 years of building our home and raising these sons with endless love, they wanted to send us away to a home. We don't need a home, Ernest replied with the quiet dignity that had always defined him. We're perfectly fine right here in our own house. But I noticed the expressions on Charles and Henry's faces. Charles wore a solemn expression that fit the occasion, but his eyes kept darting toward his watch. Henry seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Jasmine discreetly checked her phone behind her black veil. This was how they were saying goodbye to their father, with impatience and distractions. The pastor spoke about eternal life, well-deserved rest, and reuniting with God. His words felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Ernest to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, for us to continue growing old together, for us to keep drinking coffee on the porch every evening. When it was time to throw dirt on the casket, my legs refused to support me. Doris had to hold me up as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the dirt hitting the wood was final, conclusive, and completely hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing beside my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number appeared. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My heart stopped. The letters seemed to dance in front of my eyes as if I were hallucinating. I was losing my mind from the grief. With trembling hands, I replied, Who are you? The answer came back immediately. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. The phone slipped from my hands as if it were on fire. Doris bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages. Not until I understood what was really happening. Are you okay, Mom? Charles asked, approaching with a worried expression. I stared at him, trying to find some clue in his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, and every expression felt suspicious. I'm fine, I lied, slipping the phone into my purse. I just need to go home. On the way back, I couldn't stop thinking about those messages. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel joke on me at the worst moment of my life? Or was there really a chance that Ernest was still alive? But if he was alive, then who had we just buried? And if he wasn't alive, who knew enough intimate details about our lives to write something so specific about our sons? That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, I went over every detail of the last few days in my mind. Ernest's accident had seemed strange from the very beginning. According to Charles, a machine had exploded in the shop, but Ernest knew every screw and every wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance and obsessive about safety. Plus, how had my sons reached the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before I did? And then there was the constant talk about money. From the very first day, Charles and Henry had spoken about insurance policies and beneficiaries as if they had been waiting for this moment and preparing for it. I decided to check Ernest's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all his important documents in a metal box. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, shop documents, everything. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy that Charles had mentioned. But there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Ernest increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned that change to me, and more importantly, who had suggested he do it? I kept searching and found something even more disturbing. A workers' comp policy I didn't know about, purchased just 2 months before his death. $5,000 in case of accidental death on the job, $15,000 in total. It was a fortune for a family like ours, but also tempting enough for anyone without scruples. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account, see who's been moving money. This time I didn't hesitate. Whoever this person was, they knew too much to be playing a prank. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone very close to us could possibly know. The next day, I went to the bank where Ernest and I had kept our account for 30 years. Mrs. Thompson, the manager who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere condolences. Margot, I'm so sorry about Ernest. He was a good man. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I came to check our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation. She showed me the bank statements from the last 6 months. What I saw made my blood run cold. Over the past 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, and $4,000 in March. Money that I had known nothing about. Who authorized these withdrawals? I asked, my voice trembling. Your husband came in person, Mrs. Thompson explained. He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop, but I kept the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent it on. Ernest had never mentioned any expensive repairs at the shop, and we had certainly never discussed withdrawing thousands of dollars from our savings. Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals? I asked. She showed me the receipts. It did look like Ernest's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed off. It was too shaky and uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. Mrs. Thompson, I asked with my heart pounding, did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him? She thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Charles, I believe. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Ernest had trouble reading documents without his glasses. Charles. My son had been involved in money withdrawals I knew nothing about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Ernest saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I looked over the bank receipts again and again, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence that was piling up right in front of me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Charles's involvement in transactions I knew nothing about, his suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, and his coldness during his father's final days. But the question that terrified me most was whether they had actually planned Ernest's death, how they had done it, and who was sending me these messages. How did this person know so much about what had happened? The following days turned into a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every smile from Charles, every hug from Henry, and every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could fully accept a truth as horrible as the one forming in my mind. My phone continued to receive messages from the mysterious number. Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I decided to visit the shop for the first time since the accident. Charles had said a machine had exploded. But when I arrived, I found something completely different from what I had expected. The shop was strangely clean, too clean to have been the scene of a serious explosion. There were no burn marks on the walls, no debris, and no signs of the destruction that such an accident should have caused. Where is the machine that exploded? I asked out loud. I searched the entire shop and found every machine in its proper place, working perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all were completely intact. So what had really caused the accident? In Ernest's desk, I found something that sent a chill through me. A note written in his own handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margot. But something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Don't be stubborn, Henry cut in with a harshness I had never heard from him before. You're old now. You can't keep living in the past. That night, after they left, Ernest and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time in our long marriage, we discussed the painful possibility that our sons were not the people we thought we had raised. Something's wrong, Margot, my husband said with a look of deep worry I had never seen in his eyes before. This isn't just ambition or impatience. There's something darker behind all this pressure. I had no idea how right his words truly were. I couldn't imagine that my own sons were planning something that would change our lives forever. I didn't know that the tragedy coming our way wouldn't be some random accident of fate, but a carefully orchestrated conspiracy by the two people I had trusted most in the world. The last normal conversation I had with Charles took place 3 weeks before Ernest's death. He came alone, without Jasmine, and looked more serious than usual. Mom, he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a boy, I want you to know that no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you. His words comforted me at the time, but now, remembering them while standing beside Ernest's grave, they send a cold shiver down my spine. Why did he say, no matter what happens? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Ernest had left early for the shop, just as he had done every single day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with an urgency that sent a chill through my body. Mrs. Hayes? An unfamiliar voice asked. I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately. The words blurred together in my mind like ink mixing with water. The world seemed to stop spinning. My legs turned weak and I had to grab the doorframe to keep myself from falling. What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he in the ICU? Ma'am, please come as soon as possible. The drive to the hospital felt like a hazy nightmare. My neighbor Doris had to drive me because I was shaking too badly to even hold the car keys. The entire way, my mind refused to accept what was happening. Ernest was always so careful and meticulous in his work. How could this have possibly happened? When we finally reached the hospital, Charles and Henry were already there. That surprised me since no one had notified them yet. At least not me. But in my overwhelming desperation, I didn't focus on that detail at the time. Mom, Charles said, hugging me with a force that seemed almost genuine. Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury. Henry's eyes looked red, but something in his expression felt wrong. He seemed more nervous than sad, like someone anxiously waiting for important news rather than a son grieving for his father. Can we see him? I asked desperately. Only immediate family, one at a time, and for 5 minutes maximum, the nurse explained. When I entered that ICU room, my heart completely sank. Ernest was connected to a dozen machines with bandages covering most of his face and arms. I could barely recognize him. His breathing was labored and artificial, sustained by machines that beeped constantly. I walked to his bedside and took his hand, the only part of his body that still seemed intact. Ernest, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. You're going to recover, just like you always do. For a brief moment, I felt a slight squeeze from his hand. His eyes moved slightly behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to come back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room. Charles and Henry took turns staying with me, but they always seemed far more interested in speaking with the doctors than in comforting their father. I overheard fragments of conversations that I couldn't fully understand then. Henry asked about medical insurance and the cost of treatment. Charles was on the phone discussing life insurance policies and beneficiaries. Mom, Charles said to me on the second day, we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to $75,000 more. Why was he talking about money while Ernest was still fighting for his life? Why was he focused on insurance instead of his father's recovery? I don't care about the money, I responded sharply. I just want your dad to get better. Of course, Mom, he said, but I saw something in his eyes that I didn't like. A coldness, like a calculator working while his father lay dying. On the third day, the doctors delivered the most devastating news of my life. Dr. Patterson, an older man with a compassionate face, gathered us in a small office. Mrs. Hayes, he began softly, your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become infected, and the head trauma is more severe than we first thought. We have to be realistic about his chances. What does that mean? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. It means we need to prepare for the worst. Your husband is in an induced coma. We could keep him alive indefinitely, but his quality of life, well, it's highly unlikely he will ever regain consciousness. My entire world collapsed around me. 42 years of marriage, an entire life built together, and now they were telling me it was all fading away like smoke. We want to try everything, I said through my sobs. No matter the cost, no matter how long it takes. But Charles exchanged a look with Henry that deeply unsettled me. Mom, Charles said, in a voice that tried to sound understanding, we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden on anyone. A burden? I exploded with a fury I didn't know I possessed. He's your father. He's not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his whole life to give you the best he could. We know, Mom, Henry added, but we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings. Again, money. Always money. My husband was dying, and they were busy calculating costs. That night, alone in the hospital room, I took Ernest's hand and spoke to him as if he could hear every word. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you. It was then that something happened that still gives me goosebumps to this day. His fingers moved slightly, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved as if he were trying desperately to say something, but no sound came out. I called for the nurses in a panic. He's reacting. He's trying to talk. But by the time they arrived, Ernest had slipped back into his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew what I had felt. Ernest had tried to communicate with me. He had fought to tell me something important. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarm suddenly went off. Lights flashed everywhere. Nurses rushed into Ernest's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the noise woke me. No, 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 I screamed, running toward the room. The doctors worked for 40 minutes trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. At 4:37 in the morning, Ernest was officially declared dead. The pain I felt in that moment was physical, as if my heart had been violently ripped from my chest. I collapsed beside his bed, hugging his still warm body and refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Charles and Henry arrived at the hospital about an hour after their father's death. They seemed strangely prepared, as if they had been expecting the call. They brought papers, documents, and phone numbers for funeral homes. We already talked to the Spring Creek Funeral Home, Charles said while I was still crying uncontrollably. They can pick up the body this morning. We also contacted the insurance, Henry added. The claim process is already underway. How could they be so efficient, so organized, and so cold just 1 hour after losing their father? Something was very wrong, but my grief was so overwhelming that I couldn't think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Charles handled all the arrangements without really consulting me. He chose the simplest casket and the shortest service, as if he wanted to finish everything as quickly as possible. It's what Dad would have wanted, he said when I complained about not being included in the decisions. Something simple, without any fuss. But Ernest deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and move on. The day of the funeral arrived, cloudy and cold, as if the sky itself were mourning Ernest. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn for my mother's funeral years earlier. My hands were shaking so badly that Doris had to help me button the small buttons on the back. Be strong, Margot, my dear friend whispered as she gently combed my hair. Ernest would want to see you strong. But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage cannot be buried so easily. Every object in the house reminded me of him. His coffee mug on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow that still carried his scent. When we reached the cemetery, I was surprised by how few people had come. I had expected to see more of Ernest's coworkers from the shop, more neighbors, more acquaintances. But it was only Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, me, and the pastor. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town and helped so many people, the funeral felt strangely empty. Where are the guys from the shop? I asked Charles. We didn't want to bother anyone, he replied quickly. Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. But that wasn't true. Ernest loved his community. He cared deeply about his neighbors. He would have wanted them there to say goodbye. Why had Charles made everything so secretive and rushed? During the service, I watched my sons with a strange emotional detachment.